Well, we have been in a series these last weeks in the Gospel of Mark, and we've been moving pretty fast through Mark's Gospel. Today, we're going to look at chapters 4 and 5, and because we're kind of taking big chunks, we're not going to be able to go by verse, so I've been encouraging you to read on your own, and I hope that you're doing your reading. Before our question today, I want to just read a few verses from chapter 4. So if you've got a Bible, page 832 in our church Bibles. If you haven't noticed, we got new church Bibles this week due to the gift of a member of Lighthouse as well as some memorials. So it's page 832 in all of the pew Bibles anyway. And if you have a recovery Bible, it's page 1257. And I'm going to begin reading at verse 35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. But soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind, and he said to the waves, "Silence, be still." And suddenly the wind stopped, and there was great calm. And then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" All right. Wouldn't that be cool? That would have been a cool experience. I want you to hold on to that. Leave the Bibles open. Here's our question for today. What is the worst storm you have ever been in? You have to, if you're new, you have to stand up, get Lion's attention, and speak clearly into the mic, and you can answer the question for us. What is the worst storm that you have ever been in?
I don't know if it was the worst storm, but the scariest one for me was when we were living in the Twin Cities. I was driving home from work on the interstate and got caught in a hailstorm it wasn't humongous, but it was a little less than golf ball size, probably hail, but came crashing down on my windshield, and I was just scared it was going to knock my windshield in. And of course, everyone on the interstate then stopped, so I was trapped out in the interstate in a hailstorm.
Thank you, Missy. Anybody else?
Sorry. When I was in high school, I was helping out with an art class, and the tornado sirens went off, and I was on my bike. And I called my dad, and he said, "Well, you come over to the store," and which I don't know if that was such a good idea, because he was an implement dealer. But anyway, as I was trying to ride my bike as fast as I could to get to his store, I could see the tornado coming down out of the sky. And fortunately, it never did touch ground, but it was still awfully scary to be on my bike and seeing a tornado coming down.
To live here means you're going to see some big storms, that's for sure.
One year we were out camping, and it had been really humid that day, so we knew that something was probably going to roll in. And my son Derek had a friend that had never been camping before. And we were in a tent, and all of a sudden the wind started to pick up, and it started to rain pretty hard, and lightning was flashing, and all of a sudden I heard Christopher yell to me, "Mary, tell me it's going to be okay again."
Nice story. Thanks, Mary. Anybody else?
I think it was 1964, because I know I had two little babies, and it was a blizzard, and it was about a 3-day longer, which we haven't had for a while, thank goodness. But back in '64, they didn't get out, clear the roads, and do what they do now. So We lived on 28th Avenue North, just a little ways from Hornbacher's, and some of the kids needed milk, and we needed some things, and so my husband and a woman and I think 2 other guys all walked over to Hornbacher's, hand in hand, arm in arm. They did not let go like a chain. And they got the milk back. Then we had an RN in our building who had to get to work at Sanford because she worked in the heart department and they needed her. So they found a way to take her to Sanford. They took about 3 guys and went in the car. And they got her there and home, and all the while they were gone, though it's pretty scary.
Yeah, yeah. Boy, if you've lived here very long, you've lived through those kind of storms. Anybody else? Worst storm you've ever been in? Lynn?
I think I caused the worst storm I've ever been in by some of the things I've done. I'm thinking weather here, but I guess what my storm was within myself.
We're going to stop there. Thank you, Lynn. Excellent. I said just a minute ago, to live here means you've seen some big storms, right? To live means that you're going to see some pretty big storms. Do you hear the difference? To live means that you're going to see some pretty big storms. Here's a question I've often wondered about. Why doesn't Jesus calm a few of my storms? Why do I have to go through the storm that I'm walking through right now? Some of you might be thinking. If Jesus calms storms, hey, here's one, you might be thinking. Wonder if you've ever wondered that, or if you're wondering it right now. And if so, good. Hold on to that thought, because we're going to come back to you. Okay, in the beginning of chapter 4, Jesus is teaching the people. And the story that we read just a few minutes ago is kind of a ways into chapter 4. It's at the end of chapter 4. The beginning of chapter 4, Jesus is teaching, and Mark doesn't include very many of Jesus' teachings, very interestingly. There's a lot more teachings in Matthew and Luke and in John. And this is the only parable that Jesus tells where he gives an explanation to his disciples. And it's a very familiar parable. And coincidentally, if you have been with us on Wednesday nights at Lent, we actually just looked at it on Wednesday night this last week as well. So grab that Bible again, and we're going to look at chapter 4, beginning at verse 3. Jesus said, "Listen, a farmer went out to plant some seed, and as he scattered it across the field, some of the seed fell on a footpath, and the birds came and ate it. Other seed fell on shallow soil with underlying rock. The seed sprouted quickly because the soil was shallow. But the plant soon wilted under the hot sun, and since it didn't have deep roots, it died. Other seed fell among thorns that grew up and choked out the tender plants so that they produced no grain. Still other seed fell on fertile soil, and they sprouted, grew, and produced a crop that was 30, 60, and even 100 times as much as had been planted." Then he said, "Anyone who has ears to hear should listen and understand." It's a great parable. One of the great things about it, I think, is that there's different levels, different ways to look at this parable. For example, on one level, particularly in its context of being spoken some 2,000 years ago by Jesus, Jesus is the sower. And he's encouraging his disciples who are seeing Jesus sow seeds. He's encouraging them because not everybody's hearing the message. And it's going to only get worse for Jesus, as we're going to see in Mark's gospel. And so he's saying, don't worry about it. The sower just keeps sowing the seed. And people are going to receive it differently. But we just keep on sowing, and there will be a harvest. But then there's another level where one could look at this parable from the vantage point of Jesus speaking to the church today. And Jesus is saying to the church, yes, I know that, it can be frustrating to keep sharing the gospel. Some of you have kids or family members or loved ones who have heard about Jesus, maybe grew up in your home hearing about Jesus, and they've just kind of left and walked away. And what Jesus is saying is, yeah, it can be difficult. Not everybody's going to receive the gospel the same way. You know what your job is? Your job is to keep sowing. Keep sowing. Keep sowing. The whole chapter of chapter 4 talks about how seeds grow, even though we don't know how. Then there's this third level, which is kind of interesting, and that's what I want to look at for a moment with you today. On the third level, Jesus is really speaking to us personally. It's kind of interesting. The seed and the sower are constant. It doesn't say that the sower does anything different with the different kinds of soil. It doesn't say that the seeds are different, when they fall in different places. It's the varies. And Jesus wants us to know that at times it's probably good for us to just ask, what kind of soil am I? Because He knows that we can see ourselves in the soil. Some of you here this morning can probably see yourself in the hardened soil. The hardened soil is the soil that falls upon the footpath. Maybe you and I would say it falls upon the sidewalk. And it's not going to have much luck, springing any kind of root. For the soil is way too hard for it to take root. It's often our hurts and our pain and our experience then hardens us. What happens is that we tell ourselves that we won't put ourselves in the places that hurt us ever again. So some of you perhaps have been let down by somebody, and it's hard for you to trust again. Some of you have had somebody hurt you and hurt you deeply, and you're not sure that you're willing to go into a relationship like that again. For some of you, perhaps it's been a great loss for which you grieve, and you're not sure that you want to open up your heart again. For some of you, perhaps you've been abused, and the abuse that you experienced has shaped your life, and you're not sure that you even want to go on living anymore again. Maybe it was a work situation or a lost job that paralyzed you. Maybe you felt that God let you down on some level. The reality is that our hurts harden us, and they can paralyze us. I want you to tell me you know what I mean. When you've been hurt, it's hard to put yourself out there again. You know what I mean? I was thinking about that this week, and I was thinking about my own journey. Pretty much everybody knows quite a bit about my journey with burnout and some personal struggles, particularly with alcohol and depression. And there was a period where I thought for a while that I was done with ministry. In fact, I was quite certain I was done with ministry. But as time went on, God broke up the hardened soil. And He can do it for you. He can do it for you. What you might have to do is to let go of some things in order to move on. But God can do it for you. There was a teacher who was telling about doing a science lesson on how plants grow. The children all got their chance to plant their own seeds. And as the teacher, she writes, I planted a few extra seeds for the children whose plants would not sprout. After a few weeks of watching them, I secretly exchanged a few. And the next day, one of my students said, "Look, teacher, it's a miracle. My plant is growing." And I said, yes, seeds are a miracle. Their sprouting is a miracle every time. He said, no, teacher, that's not the miracle. I ate my seed and it's growing anyway. If you're on hardened soil, don't give up. Because God can make things grow, even on hardened soil. Second soil is shallow soil. And we don't know anything about being shallow, do we? I wonder if you've ever expressed, ever experienced a spiritual moment that has touched you deeply, and you knew that it had led you to a new place with God, and 30 minutes later it was gone. Or 30 minutes later you find yourself gossiping again, or harboring a resentment or anger, or struggling with the same old sin that you knew most of your life. I remember hearing at an AA meeting, not supposed to tell stories, but no names attached. Remember hearing somebody say that I go to church every Sunday, and I would go to church and I would just have this deeply spiritual moment, and by halftime of the Vikings game I was 8 beers in. Richard Foster says, superficiality is the curse of our age. Here's the deal. Shallow soil only sees the surface. And it's not willing to ask painful and difficult questions. Like, why do I feel this way? Why can't I trust others? Why do I hurt those I love? Why am I going to deal with this? Why am I going to deal with this pain and abuse any longer? How am I going to deal with this betrayal? I'd like you to grab your Bible and look at chapter 4. It's amazing how Scripture kind of all fits together. I want you to look at chapter 4, verse 21. Then Jesus asked them, would anyone light a lamp and then put it under a basket or under a bed? Of course not. A lamp is placed on a stand where its light will shine. For everything that is hidden will eventually be brought into the open. Every secret will be brought to anyone who has ears to hear should listen and understand. What in the world does that mean? Well, what it means is that we need to expose to the light our boxes of guilt and bitterness, anger and shame and denial that we hide behind. The shallow soil continues to hide behind those things that somehow have now begun to dictate life. And in our journeys of faith and life, we need to expose them to the light. It's kind of what Lighthouse is all about. In the book Soul Keeping that I know some of you are reading, and which we will not have an order for, by the way, John Ortberg writes, the world conspires against our souls by blinding us to the depth and glory of their God-given design and tempting us to be satisfied with immediate gratification. In high school, Steve was a wonderful football player. Hurting his knee in junior college, he dropped out, got married, and had a child. He never chose to defy God. He just drifted away. It was easier to drink beer than to work on his marriage, so he got a divorce. It was easier to complain than to work with all his soul, so he lost his job. It was easier to avoid people who would challenge him to tend to his soul, so he hung out with people who would honor his desire for comfort above all. He lives with his own son now after being estranged for years. He is there only because he has nowhere else to go. He watches vast amounts of porn in his bedroom to pass the time. He has lost his health. He does not even take care of his body. He is waiting to die. And when he does, no one is going to mourn. But outside Steve's bedroom door, if he only knew his son waits for him to say one word or love. It takes a little, such a tiny little depth in the soil to give the seed a chance. The shallow soil is closer to being saved than it knows. Finally, there's the cluttered soil. We know what this is like as well. In soul keeping, it's the hurried life, if you've been reading soul keeping at all. It's the accumulation of money and possessions as we search for contentment and security, only to find that they often rob us of the very thing that they promise. It's our desire and our commitment to truly follow Jesus in my life, except I'm going to withhold just this one little part. And so I'm going to follow Jesus, but the cluttered soil says, I might just hold back this one secret sin. Or I'm going to hold back giving generously. Or I'm going to hold back my vocation. I'm going to hold back my fears, or I'm going to hold back my addiction. The cluttered soil is perhaps the one that most of us know best. And then there's the good soil. This is where faith grows and where we find our place in life. It's where you can find your serenity, but more, you can find meaning and purpose. You can begin to learn why it is that you're here on this earth. And so Jesus goes on, interestingly, to tell a couple of more parables after this parable, and he tells more parables about seeds. First of all, he talks about how God's kingdom grows in us, and we don't always see it, and we don't always understand how it works. It starts small, but it grows, and it provides fruit in our lives, and this is important, it gives us a foundation in our lives. And the reason why there's all this talk about seeds and faith and where it is that we are in this journey of faith is because Jesus knows this. In your life, storms are going to come. In your life, storms are going to come. At the end of chapter 4, Jesus calms the storm. In chapter 5, we meet 3 people who are in the midst of their own storms. And I wish we could look at each of them individually, but that's for another time. Encourage you to read them. But in each instance, Jesus calms storms again. But here's the key, and I want you to hear this very, very clearly. Here's the key to this whole storm. How much water did you guys spill up here? Good grief. Okay, here, I thought maybe there was a hose running or something. A little distracting, by the way. Okay, here's the key. Everybody listen to me, don't look at the lion. I want you to know this because it's very, very important in your life. This is very, very important in your life. And we learn it in this little story that we started with today. Jesus delivers us not from storms, but through them. I want you to repeat after me. Jesus delivers us not from storms, but through them. The sooner we learn this, the better off we're going to be. He doesn't deliver us from them, but through them. He doesn't tell his disciples on the shore, hey, I don't think we should get in the boat tonight. The weatherman's saying that there might be a storm. In fact, it's the opposite. And if you have read the Gospels at all, Jesus probably knew it was going to storm. He's the Son of God, by the way. Mark started by telling us in the beginning. Jesus says, hey, let's get in the boat and go for a ride. Doesn't say let's not get in the boat. says, let's get in the boat. There might be a storm coming. Now, there's a mystery to God's sovereignty, and we can't answer it. There's just a lot we're not going to get on this side of eternity. Many of you have heard me say before that C.S. Lewis once said that the most common word spoken in heaven is going to be the word "oh." Like, oh. What we know here is that there's going to be storms. We know that, right? And the faith that we have will make all the difference in the world. Some of you are just on the storm avoidance track. I'm going to tell you, it doesn't work. Some of you would just like to avoid storms. I would just rather not step in the boat. I've been hurt. I've got these experiences, Nobody has experiences like me. I'm unique and special. And so I'm not going in the boat because a storm might come. And if that's true, what happens is you might miss out on what God wants to do in your life. And frankly, you're going to get a storm anyway. So why does God allow us to get into the boat and go through a storm? Let me tell you why quickly, and then we're going to close and have communion. First of all, storms shape us and they grow us. If you were to be honest, and you were to look back over your life, and you were to define those moments that had the greatest impact in building your character and your faith, you would pick the stormy times of your life. We've talked about Romans 5 before. We rejoice in our sufferings because we know suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope, and hope never disappoints us. When you're going through a storm, you can go, all right, I'm going through a storm. Doesn't feel like that at the time, but you know that it's going to shape you. When we expose our lives to the light and deal with it, we grow. When we deny the storm, we become stagnant and paralyzed. Secondly, God allows us to go through storms because sometimes He uses storms to get our attention. Certainly was the case in my life. Had a friend tell me, God gets our attention. Sometimes it's with a metaphor, sometimes it's with a 2x4, but He'll get our attention. I was remembering with Beth, actually just this morning I remembered this. We had, hi Jackson. Boy, is this Interruption Sunday or what? This is my grandson, if you don't know. My kids, like everybody else's kids, in fact, good timing, this is my daughter. My daughter and my son, but my daughter in particular, would once in a while, throw these fits. Do you have kids who have ever thrown fits? And she would sometimes get kind of out of control. And we did, I don't want to open a spanking debate. We did not really spank our kids, except for on extremely rare occasions. And Sarah was throwing this uncontrollable fit, and Beth gave her a little swat, and she stopped and she said, "Thank you, Mom." What had happened? Her emotions, her life was out of control, and something brought her back. Sometimes God allows us to go through storms to get our attention. Got my attention. Has He ever gotten yours? And here's the third thing, and then we're going to wrap up. I love this one, and if you remember nothing else, I want you to remember what I'm going to share with you right now. Sometimes God allows us to go through storms because of what happens to us on the other side. It empowers us. I just want you to think about those disciples. It says that Jesus calmed the storm, and afterwards the disciples were afraid. You know what they were like the next day? Oh man, did you see Him calm that storm? Jesus, let's go for a boat ride. I want to see another storm. You could almost hear it a little bit in some of the answers you guys gave about the storms you've been through. You know, you get to the other side and it's like, yeah, bring it on, man. I can do the storm thing, huh? Now, it doesn't feel like that when you're going through it, but on the other side, you begin to understand with a new reality and a new power that indeed the verse is correct, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I battled addiction, but I am now on the other side because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I have battled mental illness, but today I am depression-free because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The diagnosis of cancer or any other diagnosis that you might receive, it's a storm that comes into your life, but with Christ on board, you can face the storms. Man, if you are trapped in the hardened soil, in the shallow soil, or even the thorny soil, today I want you to stand. I want you to declare that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. That there are going to be times in my life when I am in the storm, but man, I am getting in the boat with Jesus, because when I'm in the boat with Jesus, I know that I will be able to see the other side. And even if it means that I do not see the other side of this storm that I now face, I know that there will be a new life, a new heaven, and a new earth that will be given to me, that I will someday see that all storms, all creation, all that is here and now is just a little bit of what God has prepared for those who love Him. Because in the next place, there'll be no more storms. Might be kind of boring, actually. No more storms. No more storms. Amen.